So now I'm going to be talking a bit more about my own experience and how being female might have resulted in my late diagnosis, despite the fact that I showed very obvious symptoms of autism from a young age. So as I say, so picture in your head now the stereotype of an autistic person. What the sort of stereotype that you might have of an autistic person. My guess is, I could well be wrong here, but the kind of general stereotype is of a boy who's really geeky and very, very obsessed with something technical, like, say, computers or trains, and displaying very sort of challenging, difficult behaviour that just cannot be ignored. Okay, so that's likely to be, and there are many stereotypes, but that's likely to be just one of them. And also, maybe you might be thinking of someone who doesn't talk very much, who's kind of very limited verbally. Of course, obviously, autistic people like that exist, but that's just one type of autism. Autism is a really broad, vast thing, and every single autistic person is their own individual, so it's going to express differently in different people, despite the fact you're going to share the same core underlying difficulties. Now, research has identified that interests is the main area where males with autism on average differ from females. So historically, clinicians would have looked out for very eccentric and peculiar interests in parts of objects or things like lights, street signs or drainage facilities. And also, the male autism stereotype emphasises the rote repetition of scientific facts, little interest in, sort of creative activities. But research from Great Ormond Street has shown that because of gender differences, girls' obsessional interests are often centred around relationships and people. So a girl with autism might have age-appropriate interests in, for example, horses, fashion, makeup, dolls, celebrities, reading fiction, yet although the subject might be typical, the intensity of the interest is what sets the autistic girl apart from her typical peers. Now, all of my interests have, generally speaking, been socially focused. So, as a child, I was obsessed with food and what other people were eating. Food, in fact, has been a lifelong interest of mine. I'm still very interested in food. Now it's more cooking and, I just love experimenting with food. It's my lifelong passion. And I guess, it is quite sort of like a scientific interest, but it's not your kind of stereotypical autistic interest, but in intensity it is really very extreme. So at school, just to give you an example of the intensity of the interest, I memorised what every child in my class had to eat for lunch. And I was also very interested and obsessed with other girls. I would collect leaflets and cut out photographs of girls, which I stuck on a piece of paper. And I would write a story about that girl's life, which mainly focused on food and her appearance. I became very interested in the Mallory Towers Girl at Boarding School books, which I memorised off by heart. And I loved, in great detail and in great depth, is the intensity of the interest. So it was a very autistic interest in the sense that it was extremely intense, and these were the only things I could think about. But of course, it wasn't like the stereotype of an autistic interest, which is based on that kind of very male-centric perspective. And of course, my biggest interest was the actress Kate Winslet, which I was interested in for a decade, between the age of 11 and 21. That was an extremely intense interest. I watched and memorised all her films, I watched all her interviews, I collected every single Winslet picture. I spent literally hours learning everything there was to know about her life. And I became really interested in babies after Kate Winslet had a baby. I became extremely interested in child development. I read parenting magazines from cover to cover. I also followed people with babies down the high street, and I took detailed notes in my baby spotting diary as if I were a child psychologist, examining a child in a laboratory. So if I was a boy going train spotting and obsessively looking at those rail networks, my interest might have appeared more characteristically autistic, but because being interested in babies is considered quite common in women, the interest was perhaps a bit less noticeable, although I say that with a caveat because my parents were aware right from the start this wasn't quite a usual interest, but it might have kind of put it might have resulted in a delayed diagnosis. Also, in a sense that when I was at school, I would be quite kind of like, how can I put it? I would kind of camouflage my interest quite a lot. So the stereotype what people often have is of a boy like go on and on and on about his special interest, talking at length to his classmates all about trains and things like that. I did do that with my interest. I would talk obsessively about them at home. That's all I would talk about. I didn't have any friends. I was very isolated, and I had these obsessive, intense interests, and of course all the other autistic symptoms, which were picked up on from a very young age. In fact, I was assessed at school by an educational psychologist when I was 9 years old because my problems, they couldn't be ignored. I was really struggling with certain aspects of learning because I also have dyscalculia. But of course, being poor at maths, oh no, that's not the stereotype, is it? Because of course, that's another thing. People often assume that autistics are great at maths, again, because of this sort of male-centric lens and this kind of stereotypical idea that boys are good at maths, autism is extreme male brain, But actually, in fact, many autistics are rubbish at maths. It's a wide spectrum, this autism. Autistic people vary immensely from one another. And in my case, I really struggled with maths. But that's possibly, again, why it wasn't, I didn't think, autism, possibly, we don't know. But, and so all my problems were picked up from a very young age. People just didn't put two and two together. My parents first started to suspect I might be autistic in my early teens. And it's impossible. My being female might just be one reason why it took so long to get me diagnosed. I can't say 100% that it was the only reason. I can only conjecture. And the other thing I like to say is that this doesn't just apply to girls. Although girls are historically underdiagnosed, many boys and men are also receive very late diagnoses as well. So I don't think this is just unique to girls. I think certainly being female is an extra reason why you might receive a late diagnosis. But I also think it's because of stereotypes in general, which can apply to boys and men as well. Particularly as being autistic, as a rule, and this is a very crude generalisation, but being autistic can make you less likely to follow rigid gender rules because autism is a socialising difficulty. Because it's a socialising difficulty, you're actually far more likely to actually be androgynous than to be one gender or the other. And when I was thinking about how to talk about this, part of me was thinking, but I don't really identify properly as female, or how society says. I just do my own thing. So it can be quite hard for me. I mean, certainly all of my interests, as I was explaining, are quite, for want of a better word, feminine. But I don't act. But I do my own thing. If I'm interested in something, I'm interested in it. I'm not thinking, I'm doing this because I'm a woman. I don't tend to kind of really follow society's rules like that. So while it kind of probably goes without saying that obviously, I exist in a gendered milieu, so obviously it's going to have some effect on me, and it may well have resulted in the fact of me being diagnosed later. And who knows, if I was a boy, maybe teachers would have thought autism, instead of, calling me an enigma and constantly calling my parents in and saying, oh, what's up with Anna? How can we help Anna? We don't understand Anna, and getting me assessed. But, and the assessment just reeled off a long list of difficulties that I had, but they didn't put two and two together. And, possibly if I was a boy, who knows, possibly they would have thought autism, because that's often the default reaction. If you're a boy and you have problems with social skills, problems with making friends, problems with eye contact, people are more likely to think autism. If you're a girl with exactly the same problems, like I was, people tend to don't tend to come to the same conclusions. I was said to be lacking in confidence, and so on and so forth, but they just called me an enigma. And also, of course, because I was really verbal as well, and again, that's another stereotype about autism. But I was very exceptionally verbal, and verbal is one of my strengths. But it was the non-verbal, the problems knowing how to make friends, problems with practical skills, difficulties with some motor skills, real difficulties of organisation that were really holding me back in the classroom. But because I had such a high verbal, again, I think that's also part of the reason why they just couldn't make me out. I wasn't like a conventional child with learning difficulties, if you like. I was a bit all over the place. In some areas I really, really struggled. In other areas I was like with my reading, on one level I could read 5 years ahead of my age, but I didn't understand what I was reading. I didn't have a comprehension. My comprehension was lagging 2 years behind, and I just couldn't make sense of this. So, as happens with many girls, initially, it was put down to anxiety and other things, and the first diagnosis I received was OCD. Now, I do have OCD, but it's actually largely caused, in fact, by my autism. And this is quite common, and it's actually called diagnostic substitution or diagnostic overshadowing, which is when autistic women often get diagnosed with other things before they get diagnosed with autism, because their problems are explained as something else. So that's quite a common thing. So to sum up, really, I do want to make it very clear that what I've been talking about here is not unique to women, and I think people often talk about this idea as a sort of autism, a female autism phenotype, but autism expresses itself completely differently in women. That is not correct. I don't think that's correct. I think that women can express autism differently just because women are socialised differently. So obviously, autistics don't exist in a vacuum, just as non-autistic men and women, boys and girls look a little bit different because they exist in this sort of gendered world. Obviously, that's going to occur in autism too. But I think the bigger issue is not so much how autism is expressed, it's more to do with what people expect. I think it's because people have these gendered expectations, and then they kind of they kind of explain away the behaviour based upon his gendered expectations. So a girl with autism who doesn't have any friends, who might be explained away, oh, she's shy. A boy who's isolated without any friends, oh, he's autistic. Now, and as I say, although on average, it's possible that girls with autism might display slightly different interests to boys with autism, as a very crude average, there are going to be many girls who are obsessed with computers, and there are going to be boys with autism who like playing with My Little Pony. So you can't put boys and girls into pigeonholes and say this is how we're going to behave because they're a boy or girl. This is a really crude average, and it's just one out of many other variables, particularly as people with autism are often slightly more impervious to gendered expectations anyway and just tend to do their own thing. So I actually think a bigger issue is societal expectations and stereotypes, and I personally do not think there's an autism female phenotype. I think actually autism expresses itself differently for many different reasons in many individuals. There's no such thing as one way that autism can look. Once you've met one autistic person, you have literally met one autistic person. There's a whole range of other variables, IQ, personal experience, upbringing, ethnicity, culture, economic status, that all overlap with the person's autism. So I actually think there's no such thing as a female phenotype. What there is simply different ways that autism expresses itself. And if you express your autism in a stereotypical, sort of, in inverted commas, male way that people expect, regardless of whether you're male or female, you are more likely to get a diagnosis, but particularly if you're male. If you're female and expressing a sort of male type of autism, that obviously makes it more likely you're going to be diagnosed, maybe. But I think that because you are female, regardless of how you express your autism, just the fact you are female, people are going to be explaining it, likely going to be thinking, oh, because she's female, it's not autism, even if she's displaying the sort of male type of autism. And if you're a boy or man who's exhibiting a more like female type of autism, and I say female because, it's in inverted commas, it's like, I personally don't think it is such a thing, really. But if you say like a boy and you're playing with My Little Pony and things like that, people, maybe you're less likely to get diagnosed as autism as well, although it's still likely to be more likely to be picked up than if you were also, say, female, just because being male is an advantage anyway in terms of the likelihood of being picked up. But if you are male and playing with My Little Pony, that might put people off the scent a bit, maybe, even if that interest is just as intense, say, as a boy playing with trains. So that's what I really wanted to get across to you as I conclude this video, that although I've been talking about autism and women, I've only been talking very crudely in terms of averages. Women are historically overdiagnosed. How they express their autism is likely to be just one part of that. I think the bigger issue is not so much how autism is expressed, because people with autism tend to be more androgynous, and I certainly am. I don't really think of myself as, gender to me is quite an abstract term, so I'm not really sure, female, male, what does that actually mean? It's not something I really go about my day-to-day life thinking about. But obviously, you know, I appreciate and realise that, you know, gender has obviously undoubtedly affected me. You know, if I was a boy, you know, who knows, my interests might have been different. They might not have been, but they might have been different. And I do think it's the interests that is often the main reason why girls are diagnosed later, because people have a very set idea of what autistics are supposed to be interested in. And many autistics, by the way, are not interested in trains. Many autistics are not interested in computers. Many autistics are rubbish at maths. Many autistics are obsessed with people. Autism comes in all shapes and sizes. That's the most important thing I wanted to say as I conclude this video. So I hope this video has been interesting for you, and yeah, and if you would like me to do more videos on this, do let me know, and I'll try and do some more videos on this topic. So thank you for watching.